Marcus Chun had always been the quiet one. Throughout high school in San Francisco's Richmond district, while his classmates worried about prom dates and college applications, Marcus spent his afternoons at his grandfather's small apartment, listening to stories that seemed too incredible to be true. His grandfather, Wei Chun, spoke in hushed tones about things that happened long before Marcus was born. Stories about courage under impossible circumstances, about choices that define not just individuals, but entire generations. The old man's hands would shake slightly as he poured tea, the tremor more noticeable when the weather turned cold. Marcus never asked about the scars that crisscrossed his grandfather's forearms, or why certain topics would make the elderly man's eyes grow distant and unfocused. Some conversations, Marcus learned, were meant to happen when the time was right. That time came on a rainy Tuesday evening in March, just 3 weeks before Marcus was scheduled to leave for Navy SEAL training. His grandfather had called him over for dinner, but the meal sat untouched on the table as Wei Chun finally began to speak about things he had kept buried for over 50 years. Your grandmother and we never told you everything about our life in China. Wei began, his voice steady despite the weight of his words. There are things a man carries alone, until he realizes that carrying them alone serves no purpose. Marcus set down his chopsticks and gave his grandfather his full attention. Something in the old man's tone suggested this conversation would change things between them forever. Wei Chun rolled up his sleeves, revealing the scars Marcus had noticed countless times but never questioned. But this time his grandfather pointed to a specific mark, a deliberate pattern among the random cuts and burns. It was faded now, barely visible against the weathered skin, but Marcus could make out what looked like numbers and symbols. This is not a scar, Wei said quietly. This is a tattoo. A very special tattoo that saved my life and the lives of 17 other men during the Korean War. Marcus leaned forward, studying the faded marks. The numbers were clearer now that he knew what to look for. Coordinates, followed by symbols that looked like they might be Chinese characters. I was part of a reconnaissance unit, his grandfather continued. We were deep behind enemy lines when our position was overrun. I was captured along with several American soldiers. The enemy commander was preparing to execute us all when he noticed this mark on my arm. Wei paused, pouring more tea with hands that had steadied as he began sharing his burden. You see, grandson, this tattoo contained coordinates to a hidden supply depot that the Chinese forces desperately needed. But it also contained something else, information about a planned attack that would have killed hundreds of innocent civilians in a nearby village. The enemy commander recognized the significance immediately. Marcus felt his pulse quicken as his grandfather's story unfolded. This was not just family history. This was the kind of story that explained why some people choose to put themselves in harm's way for others. The commander faced a choice, Wei continued. He could execute us and lose the information forever, or he could trust that I would help him prevent a massacre. I told him I would share the information on one condition. He had to guarantee safe passage for all the prisoners, American and Chinese alike. The old man's eyes grew bright as he remembered that moment of impossible tension. He agreed. The information I provided helped prevent an attack that would have killed 300 villagers. But more than that, it created a moment of understanding between enemies, a recognition that some things matter more than the uniform you wear. Marcus sat in silence, trying to process the magnitude of what his grandfather had just shared. This quiet, gentle man who had raised him after his parents died in a car accident had once stood between life and death for hundreds of people. Why are you telling me this now? Marcus asked. Wei Chun reached into a drawer and pulled out a small piece of paper. On it was drawn the same pattern Marcus had seen on his grandfather's arm, but this version was clear and detailed. Every line, every symbol, every number was perfectly rendered, because you are about to begin a journey where you will face choices that seem impossible. You will be tested in ways that go beyond physical strength or mental toughness. And when those moments come, I want you to remember that courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to do what is right even when you are terrified. Marcus studied the drawing, memorizing every detail. Something deep inside him understood that this was more than just a family story. It was a legacy being passed down. There is more, Wei said. The American soldiers I helped save that day, one of them became a Navy SEAL. His name was James Morrison. He served for 28 years and retired as a commander. Before he died 5 years ago, he wrote me a letter. Wei pulled out an envelope, yellowed with age. Inside was a handwritten note on official Navy letterhead. Mr. Chun, Marcus read aloud. I have never forgotten what you did for us in Korea. Your courage saved not just our lives, but gave us all a deeper understanding of what service really means. I have told your story to every class of SEALs I have trained, always emphasizing that true heroism transcends nationality, religion, or politics. If any of your family ever chooses to serve, please know that they carry the respect and admiration of every man who made it home because of your sacrifice. With deepest gratitude, Commander James Morrison. Marcus felt something shift inside him as he finished reading. His decision to join the Navy SEALs had been based on a desire to serve his country and test himself against the ultimate challenge. But now he understood that he was part of something larger, a continuum of service that connected him to his grandfather's courage decades ago. I want to honor this story, Marcus said quietly. I want to carry it with me. Wei Chen nodded, as if he had been waiting for exactly those words. Then, you will need this, he said, producing a small card with the name and address of a tattoo artist in Chinatown. His name is Li Song. He knew me in the old country. He will understand what needs to be done. That night, Marcus walked through the narrow streets of Chinatown, clutching the address his grandfather had given him. Li Song's shop was tucked between a dim sum restaurant and an herbal medicine store, marked only by a small sign in Chinese characters. Li Song was older than Marcus had expected, probably in his 70s, with hands that moved with surgical precision despite his age. When Marcus showed him the drawing and explained its significance, the old tattoo artist's eyes filled with recognition and respect. Your grandfather is a good man, Li Song said in accented English. I remember when he first got this tattoo, before Korea. He was young then, like you. But already he understood that some knowledge must be preserved. Li Song studied the drawing carefully, then looked at Marcus with sharp, appraising eyes. This tattoo, it is not decoration. It is responsibility. Once you carry these marks, you carry the story they represent. You understand this. Marcus nodded solemnly. I understand. The tattooing process took 4 hours. Li Song worked in complete silence, stopping only occasionally to consult the original drawing. When he finished, Marcus looked down at his forearm and saw an exact replica of his grandfather's faded tattoo, but rendered in crisp, dark lines. The coordinates were there, marking a place that had once held crucial strategic importance. The Chinese characters were there too, symbols that spoke of courage and sacrifice. But Li Song had added something else, small, almost invisible marks that Marcus hadn't noticed in the original drawing. What are these? Marcus asked, pointing to the new additions. Li Song smiled for the first time that evening. Insurance, he said. Your grandfather's story, it is more important than even he knows. These marks will ensure that the right people recognize it when the time comes. Marcus didn't fully understand what Li Song meant, but something in the old man's tone suggested that all would become clear eventually. As Marcus walked home through the quiet streets, his forearm throbbing slightly from the fresh tattoo, he felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. In 3 weeks, he would begin the most challenging training of his life. He would be pushed beyond his physical and mental limits, tested in ways he couldn't imagine. But now he would carry something with him, a reminder that true courage often came from the most unexpected places, and that service meant something deeper than personal achievement. When he arrived home, his grandfather was waiting in the living room, despite the late hour. It is done, Wei asked. Marcus rolled up his sleeve, revealing the fresh tattoo. His grandfather studied it carefully, then nodded with satisfaction. Good. Li Song did excellent work. Now you are ready. Ready for what? Wei Chen smiled, and for a moment Marcus could see the young soldier his grandfather had once been. Ready to discover that some things are more important than fear. Ready to learn that courage is not something you find. It is something you choose again and again until it becomes who you are. That night, Marcus lay in bed thinking about the story his grandfather had shared and the mark he now carried on his arm. In a few weeks, he would be at Naval Special Warfare Training Command, facing challenges designed to break down even the strongest candidates. He thought about the American soldiers his grandfather had helped save and about Commander Morrison's letter. Somewhere in that brutal training environment, there might be instructors who remembered that story, who understood its significance. Marcus drifted off to sleep with his hand resting on the fresh tattoo, feeling connected to something larger than himself. He didn't know yet how prophetic his grandfather's words would prove to be, or how the hidden mark on his arm would change everything when the right moment came. But he was beginning to understand that he was part of something important, a story of courage that had begun decades before his birth, and that would continue long after he was gone. The tattoo was not just a memorial to his grandfather's heroism. It was a challenge to live up to that same standard of service. As sleep finally claimed him, Marcus made a silent promise to honor the story he now carried, no matter what challenges lay ahead. He would face SEAL training with more than just determination. He would carry the wisdom of his grandfather's courage, hidden beneath his sleeve, waiting for the moment when it would matter most. The bus ride to Naval Special Warfare Training Command in Coronado felt longer than the actual 12-hour journey. Marcus stared out the window at the California landscape rushing past, his hand unconsciously rubbing the spot on his forearm where his new tattoo lay hidden beneath his long-sleeved shirt. 3 weeks had passed since that life-changing conversation with his grandfather, and now reality was setting in. Basic underwater demolition / SEAL training, BUD/S, had a reputation that preceded it. Everyone knew the statistics. Roughly 75% of candidates would not make it through the 6-month program. The training was designed not just to build physical capability, but to identify individuals with the mental toughness to operate under impossible conditions. As the bus pulled through the gates of the Naval Special Warfare Center, Marcus got his first look at his new reality. The facility sprawled across the coastline with obstacle courses, training pools, and barracks that would be his home for the next half year, if he lasted that long. Marcus was assigned to Class 285, along with 49 other hopefuls from across the country. As he carried his sea bag into the barracks that first evening, he quickly sized up his classmates. There was Jake Morrison from Texas, built like a linebacker with the confidence to match. Tommy Hernandez from Chicago had the lean build of a marathon runner and the focused intensity of someone who had been preparing for this moment his entire life. Then, there was David Kumar from Georgia, whose quiet demeanor reminded Marcus of himself. David had an engineering degree from Georgia Tech and spoke with the careful precision of someone who thought through every word before speaking. These three would become Marcus's closest allies in the brutal months ahead, though none of them knew it yet. The first week was a whirlwind of medical examinations, administrative processing, and initial physical assessments. Marcus performed well on all the tests, but he was careful not to stand out too much. His grandfather's stories had taught him that sometimes the wise course was to observe and learn before revealing your true capabilities. It was during the second week that Marcus got his first real glimpse of the instructors who would determine his fate. The BUD/S training staff was led by Master Chief Petty Officer Robert Torres, a 22-year SEAL veteran whose presence commanded instant respect. Torres had the kind of weathered face that spoke of operations in places that didn't appear on most maps, and eyes that missed nothing. Alongside Torres was a rotation of instructors, each bringing their own specialties and teaching methods. There was Petty Officer First Class Williams, whose expertise in combat diving was legendary. Chief Petty Officer Ramirez handled most of the combat training scenarios. And then there was the senior instructor who caught Marcus's attention from day one, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell. Mitchell was unusual in the SEAL training environment, not just because she was one of the few female instructors, but because of her background. She had come up through naval intelligence before cross-training into special operations, and there was something in her analytical approach that reminded Marcus of his grandfather's careful way of studying situations before acting. The real training began in week 3. Hell Week was still months away, but the daily routine was brutal enough to start separating those with genuine commitment from those who had romantic ideas about becoming a SEAL. 5 a.m. wake-ups were followed by physical training that pushed everyone to their limits. Then, weapons training, combat swimming, and classroom instruction that lasted well into the evening. Marcus found himself settling into a routine. He performed well, but not exceptionally, always finishing in the top third of the class, but never drawing special attention to himself. This was a conscious strategy based on his grandfather's advice. Sometimes the strongest tree survives the storm by bending, not by standing rigid. It was during the 4th week that Marcus first noticed someone paying particular attention to him. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell had a habit of observing the candidates during training exercises, taking notes on a waterproof pad that she carried everywhere. Marcus caught her watching him several times, and there was something in her expression that suggested she was seeing more than just another candidate. The moment came during a particularly challenging beach evolution. The class was conducting surf passage training in rough conditions, with 8-foot waves pounding shore. Each boat crew had to successfully navigate their inflatable boat through the surf zone, a task that required perfect timing, coordination, and leadership under pressure. Marcus's boat crew was struggling. Jake Morrison, who had been designated as the coxswain, was letting his ego interfere with his judgment. He was trying to power through the waves instead of reading them, and the result was repeated capsizes that left the entire crew exhausted and frustrated. During a brief rest period between attempts, Marcus found himself studying the wave patterns with the same careful attention his grandfather had taught him to apply to any complex situation. He noticed something that the others had missed. There was a rhythm to the sets, a brief window of calmer water that appeared every few minutes. Morrison, Marcus said quietly, there's a pattern to these waves. If we time it right, we can get through on the backside of the big sets. Jake's initial reaction was defensive. He had been chosen as coxswain because of his imposing physical presence and natural leadership qualities, and having someone else offer tactical advice felt like a challenge to his authority. I've got this, Chun. Just focus on paddling when I tell you to paddle. Marcus nodded and said nothing more, but he continued to observe the wave patterns. 3 more attempts resulted in 3 more capsizes, and the crew's frustration was reaching a breaking point. Tommy Hernandez was starting to show signs of exhaustion, and David Kumar's usual calm demeanor was cracking under the stress. It was then that Marcus made a decision that would change everything. As they prepared for another attempt, he placed his hand on Jake's shoulder and spoke with quiet authority. Look at the waves, not the boat. See how the big sets come in groups of 3, then there's a lull? Count them out. 1, 2, 3 big ones, then a 30-second window where the water flattens out. That's our window. Something in Marcus's tone cut through Jake's defensiveness. Maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe it was the realization that his approach wasn't working, but Jake actually listened this time. You see it too? Jake asked, studying the surf. My grandfather taught me to read patterns, Marcus replied. Whether it's water, people, or situations, everything has a rhythm if you know how to look for it. Jake nodded slowly, then turned to the rest of the crew. Chin's right. We've been fighting the ocean instead of working with it. Next set, we wait for the lull, then we go fast and smooth. The next attempt was flawless. They launched during the calm period, powered through the remaining smaller waves, and found themselves in the deeper water beyond the surf zone, while other boat crews were still struggling in the whitewater. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell had been watching from the beach, and Marcus noticed her making notes on her waterproof pad. But more importantly, something had changed in the dynamic of his boat crew. Jake's ego had taken a back seat to effectiveness, and The other crew members were starting to look at Marcus with new respect. That evening, during the post-training debrief, Master Chief Torres addressed the class about leadership and teamwork. His words seemed aimed at the entire group, but Marcus had the distinct feeling that the day's surf evolution had prompted the discussion. Leadership in the SEAL teams isn't about being the loudest voice or the biggest personality, Torres said, his gravelly voice carrying clearly through the classroom. It's about making everyone around you better. It's about seeing solutions when others see only problems. And sometimes it's about knowing when to listen to the quiet voice that sees what everyone else is missing. After the formal debrief ended, Lieutenant Commander Mitchell approached Marcus as he was gathering his gear. In a word, Marcus followed her outside, wondering if he had somehow crossed a line during the day's training. Mitchell led him to a quiet spot near the beach where they could talk without being overheard. "Where did you learn to read wave patterns like that?" she asked. Marcus considered his answer carefully. "My grandfather taught me to pay attention to patterns in everything. He said that understanding how things move and change could save your life someday." Mitchell nodded thoughtfully. "Your grandfather sounds like a wise man. What was his background?" "He served in Korea," Marcus replied, keeping his answer simple. "Combat arms." Marcus hesitated for a moment, then decided to trust his instincts about Mitchell. Reconnaissance. He was captured behind enemy lines, but managed to help save several American prisoners. Something shifted in Mitchell's expression. As an intelligence officer, she understood the significance of reconnaissance operations during the Korean War. Those missions were often classified at levels that remained restricted decades later. "What was his name?" she asked. "Wei Chun." Mitchell was quiet for a long moment, and Marcus could see her processing the information. Finally, she spoke again. "Chun, I want you to understand something. What happened in your boat crew today, that kind of situational awareness and tactical thinking, that's what we're looking for. Not just the ability to follow orders, but the ability to see solutions that others miss." "Thank you, ma'am. But I also want you to understand that standing out has its own risks in this environment. There are instructors here who will push harder on candidates they think have potential, not to break them down, but to make sure they can handle the real pressures they'll face in the teams." Marcus nodded, understanding the warning implicit in her words. "There's something else," Mitchell continued. "I've been reviewing the files of all the candidates in this class. Most of them are exactly what you'd expect. High school athletes, college football players, military personnel looking for a new challenge. But there are a few who have deeper stories, family histories that suggest they understand service at a level beyond personal achievement." She paused, studying Marcus's face in the dim light from the nearby buildings. "I think you might be one of those few. And if that's true, then you should know that there are people here who will recognize that when the time is right. Your grandfather's service, if it was what I think it was, means something to the SEAL community." Marcus felt his pulse quicken, but he kept his expression neutral. "I'm not sure what you mean, ma'am." Mitchell smiled slightly. "You will. Just remember that sometimes the things we carry with us become important in ways we never expected. Stay focused on your training, but don't be afraid to let your instincts guide you when the moment comes." As Marcus walked back to the barracks that night, his mind was racing. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell clearly knew more than she was saying, and her questions about his grandfather suggested connections that Marcus was only beginning to understand. Back in his bunk, Marcus lay awake thinking about the day's events. The surf evolution had been a success, but it had also marked him as someone with potential, which, as Mitchell had warned, would bring its own challenges. More importantly, he was starting to realize that his grandfather's story was known in ways he hadn't expected. The tattoo hidden beneath his sleeve suddenly felt heavier, more significant. Lee Song's cryptic comment about insurance and the right people recognizing it was beginning to make sense. As he finally drifted off to sleep, Marcus made a mental note to call his grandfather the next time he had phone privileges. There were clearly aspects to the story he had been told that went deeper than even his grandfather had revealed. And if Lieutenant Commander Mitchell's hints were accurate, those deeper connections were about to become very important indeed. The phone call with his grandfather came 3 days later, during the brief evening period when candidates were allowed personal communication. Marcus had been thinking about Lieutenant Commander Mitchell's cryptic comments, and he needed answers about his family's history that went beyond the story he had already been told. "Grandfather, there's something I need to ask you," Marcus began, speaking quietly into the payphone despite the relative privacy of the communication area. "I wondered when this call would come." Wei Chin's voice carried a note of resignation mixed with pride. "You have met someone who knows our story." Marcus was startled by his grandfather's prescience. "How did you know?" "Because Commander Morrison kept his word. Before he died, he made sure that certain people in the SEAL community would know to watch for any descendants of the Chinese reconnaissance specialist who helped save American lives in Korea. He wanted to ensure that your family's sacrifice would be remembered and honored." The pieces were starting to fall into place in Marcus's mind. "So, Lieutenant Commander Mitchell was probably contacted when your application was processed," Wei finished. "James Morrison had many protégés in the Navy. They have been watching for you, grandson." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "Watching for me for what?" Wei was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of secrets that had been kept for decades. "There is more to the story I told you. The coordinates tattooed on my arm, they were not just for a supply depot. They marked the location of something much more important, something that the Americans never retrieved because the war ended and the location became inaccessible." Marcus gripped the phone tighter. "What kind of something?" "Intelligence documents, maps, communications codes, information that was gathered by Chinese assets who were working with American forces. When I was captured, I was carrying not just tactical information, but strategic intelligence that could have changed the course of the war." The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. "And it's still there?" "As far as anyone knows, yes. The location is in what is now North Korea, in terrain that has been inaccessible to Western intelligence for over 70 years. But times are changing, grandson. The political situation on the Korean Peninsula is shifting, and there may come opportunities that did not exist before." Marcus's mind raced as he processed what his grandfather was telling him. The tattoo on his arm wasn't just a memorial to past heroism. It was a key to intelligence that might still have strategic value. "Is that why Commander Morrison made sure people would be watching for me? Because they think there might be a chance to recover that intelligence?" "Perhaps. Or perhaps because they understand that the skills and knowledge needed for such a mission are not just tactical, but cultural. You carry both the location and the understanding of what it means. You are both American and Chinese, both insider and outsider." Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a physical burden. "What am I supposed to do with this information?" "For now, nothing except continue your training and become the best SEAL you can become. If the moment comes when your heritage and your skills are needed, you will know. Until then, you honor the story by proving yourself worthy of it." After ending the call, Marcus walked slowly back to the barracks, his mind churning with implications. He was no longer just another BUD/S candidate hoping to earn his trident. He was carrying a legacy that connected him to decades-old intelligence operations and potential future missions that he could barely comprehend. The next morning brought new challenges that temporarily pushed strategic concerns to the background. Class 285 was beginning the combat diving phase of training, one of the most dangerous and technically demanding aspects of the BUD/S curriculum. The pool complex at Coronado was designed to simulate every possible underwater scenario a SEAL might encounter. There were deep diving tanks, underwater obstacle courses, and chambers that could replicate the conditions of ship hulls or submerged structures. For many candidates, this phase would be where their SEAL aspirations ended. Marcus had always been a strong swimmer, but combat diving was different from anything he had experienced. The equipment was complex, the procedures were unforgiving, and the margin for error was essentially zero. A mistake underwater could be fatal, and the instructors made sure every candidate understood that fact. Petty Officer First Class Williams, the lead diving instructor, was a compact man with the kind of precise movements that came from decades of underwater operations. His briefings were delivered with clinical detachment, but underlying every word was the reality that the techniques being taught were matters of life and death. In the teams, you will operate in environments where surfacing is not an option, Williams explained to the class on their first day in the dive locker. Hostile waters, enemy-controlled harbors, underwater obstacles that require you to work in complete darkness with limited air supply. The techniques you learn here will determine whether you complete your mission or become a casualty. The first week of dive training focused on basic underwater procedures, mask and regulator recovery, emergency ascent techniques, and buddy breathing systems. Marcus excelled at the technical aspects, but it was his calm demeanor under stress that caught the instructor's attention. During one particularly challenging exercise, candidates had to navigate an underwater obstacle course while their masks were repeatedly flooded by instructors. The goal was to maintain situational awareness and complete the course without panicking or surfacing prematurely. Marcus was paired with David Kumar for the exercise, and they had agreed beforehand to watch out for each other. Halfway through the course, Marcus noticed that David was struggling with his breathing rhythm, showing early signs of anxiety that could quickly escalate to panic. Without hesitation, Marcus moved close to David and established physical contact, using hand signals to communicate calm and control. He guided David through the breathing techniques they had learned, demonstrating the steady rhythm that would conserve air and reduce stress. When David's air supply began running low due to his earlier inefficient breathing, Marcus immediately initiated buddy breathing procedures, sharing his own air supply while continuing to navigate the obstacle course. Petty Officer Williams, who had been monitoring the exercise from the pool deck, later commented to Lieutenant Commander Mitchell that Marcus had demonstrated exactly the kind of situational awareness and selfless teamwork that characterized the best SEAL operators. The kid didn't just complete the exercise, Williams reported. He identified a problem developing with his partner and solved it before it became critical. And he did it while maintaining mission focus and completing the course on time. Mitchell made another note in the file she was building on Marcus. The pattern was becoming clear. This candidate had an unusual combination of technical competence, tactical awareness, and leadership instinct that went beyond what could be taught. The diving phase continued with increasingly complex scenarios. Night dives in the ocean, penetration exercises on submerged mock-ups of enemy vessels, and long-duration missions that tested both physical endurance and mental resilience. It was during one of these extended underwater exercises that Marcus encountered his first real crisis of the training program. The scenario involved a simulated combat dive to place charges on an enemy pier. The dive team consisted of 4 candidates who had to operate in complete darkness, using only compass bearings and counting techniques to navigate to their target. Marcus was designated as the team leader, a responsibility that carried significant risk. If the team failed to complete the mission or if any team member was injured during the exercise, the blame would fall squarely on his shoulders. The dive began normally, with the team descending to 30 feet and beginning their underwater transit toward the target pier. Marcus maintained careful attention to navigation, checking his compass frequently and monitoring the condition of his teammates through regular physical contact. 20 minutes into the dive, disaster struck. Tommy Hernandez, who had been struggling with equipment problems throughout the diving phase, experienced a complete regulator failure. His breathing apparatus stopped functioning, leaving him without air supply while still 15 minutes away from the surface. In the darkness of the night dive, Marcus had to make instantaneous decisions that would determine whether his teammate lived or died. Standard emergency procedures called for an immediate ascent to the surface, but that would mean abandoning the mission and potentially failing the entire team. Marcus made a decision that demonstrated both his technical competence and his understanding of SEAL values. He immediately established buddy breathing with Tommy, sharing his own air supply. But instead of aborting the mission, he used hand signals to communicate a new plan to the rest of the team. David Kumar, who had proven himself to be exceptionally reliable underwater, would take Tommy directly to the surface while Marcus and Jake Morrison continued to the target. The mission would be completed, Tommy would be safe, and the team would demonstrate that they could adapt to crisis situations without abandoning their objectives. The plan worked flawlessly. David successfully brought Tommy to the surface, where safety divers were standing by to provide assistance. Marcus and Jake reached the target pier, placed their simulated charges, and completed the navigation back to the extraction point. When the team surfaced at the designated time, Petty Officer Williams was waiting with an expression that gave nothing away. The debrief that followed was intense and detailed, with every aspect of the emergency response analyzed and critiqued. "Chun," Williams said finally, "explain your decision-making process when Hernandez lost his air supply." Marcus had been dreading this moment, knowing that his unconventional response to the emergency could be seen as either brilliant improvisation or dangerous risk-taking. "Petty Officer Williams, I assessed that Tommy's safety was the immediate priority, but that the mission could still be completed with reduced personnel. Kumar had demonstrated strong underwater skills and was capable of handling the emergency ascent. Morrison and I had sufficient air supply to complete the original objective." Williams nodded slowly. "And if Kumar had experienced problems during the ascent, then I would have aborted the mission and assisted with the rescue. But I evaluated the risk as acceptable based on Kumar's demonstrated competence." Williams was quiet for a long moment, then turned to address the entire team. "What Shin did tonight was exactly what we hoped to see from SEAL leaders. He prioritized the safety of his team while maintaining mission focus. He made tactical decisions under extreme pressure, and he trusted his teammates to execute their parts of an improvised plan." The relief Marcus felt was overshadowed by the realization that his actions had been evaluated not just for their immediate effectiveness, but for what they revealed about his potential as a SEAL operator. Later that evening, as the team was securing their equipment, Jake Morrison approached Marcus with an expression of genuine respect. "Chun, I owe you an apology," Jake said. "I've been thinking of you as the quiet guy who stays in the background. But what you did tonight, that took serious leadership skills. I was ready to panic when Tommy's gear failed, but you kept everyone focused and got the job done." Marcus appreciated the acknowledgement, but his mind was already moving to larger concerns. Each successful evolution in training was bringing him closer to earning his SEAL Trident, but it was also bringing him closer to the moment when his grandfather's legacy might become relevant in ways he was only beginning to understand. That night, as he lay in his bunk reviewing the day's events, Marcus found himself thinking about the intelligence that might still be hidden in North Korea, waiting for the right moment and the right person to retrieve it. His grandfather's words echoed in his mind. "If the moment comes when your heritage and your skills are needed, you will know." Marcus was beginning to suspect that his training at BUD/S was preparing him for more than just standard SEAL operations. The combination of his cultural background, his family's intelligence legacy, and his developing tactical skills was creating a unique capability that someone, somewhere, was planning to use. He fell asleep with his hand resting on the hidden tattoo, feeling the weight of history and the anticipation of a future that was rushing toward him faster than he had ever imagined possible. Hell Week arrived in the middle of October like an inevitable storm. Class 285 had been reduced to 37 candidates through the attrition of the previous weeks, and everyone knew that the next 5 days would determine who would continue toward earning their SEAL Trident and who would join the ranks of those who had tried and failed. Marcus had been preparing for Hell Week mentally and physically for months, but nothing could fully prepare a person for the reality of 5 days and nights with virtually no sleep, constant physical exertion, and psychological pressure designed to break down even the strongest candidates. The week began at midnight on Sunday with the sound of machine gun fire and explosive simulators that jolted the candidates from their sleep. Instructors wearing camouflage face paint stormed through the barracks, shouting orders and driving everyone outside for the first evolution of Hell Week. Drop and give me 50. Now, move, move, move. The voices of the instructors cut through the night air as 37 young men stumbled into formation, still groggy from the abrupt awakening. Master Chief Torres stood before the assembled candidates, his presence commanding even in the chaos of the moment. Gentlemen, welcome to Hell Week. For the next 5 days, you will discover what you are truly made of. Some of you will find reserves of strength and determination you never knew you possessed. Others will discover that their limits are lower than they thought. The first evolution was a 4-mile run in boots and pants, followed immediately by a series of calisthenics that left everyone breathless. Then came the first boat carry, teams of 7 candidates hoisting 180-pound inflatable boats over their heads and running with them along the beach. Marcus found himself assigned to a boat crew that included Jake Morrison, Tommy Hernandez, David Kumar, and 3 other candidates he knew less well. The dynamics of the boat crew would be crucial during Hell Week, as success or failure would be determined by the weakest link in each team. By Tuesday afternoon, the attrition had begun in earnest. 3 candidates had quit during the night, unable to cope with the combination of exhaustion, cold, and constant pressure. 2 more had been rolled out of the class due to injuries sustained during the grueling physical evolutions. It was during Tuesday night's surf torture, an evolution that required candidates to lie in the cold Pacific Ocean wave for hours while instructors shouted at them, that Marcus had his first real conversation with one of the senior instructors. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell appeared beside him in the surf zone, sitting down in the shallow water where the waves crashed over both of them repeatedly. Her presence was unusual. Most instructor interaction during Hell Week consisted of shouted orders and criticism. "How are you holding up, Chun?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the sound of the waves. Marcus was shivering uncontrollably, as were all the candidates, but his voice was steady when he replied, "I'm fine, I'm ready for whatever comes next. I've been watching you this week. You're performing well, but more importantly, you're keeping your boat crew together. Morrison was ready to quit yesterday during the log PT, but I saw you talking him through it." Marcus had indeed spent considerable effort during the previous day's evolution, helping Jake Morrison overcome a moment of despair. The log PT exercise required boat crews to lift and maneuver heavy telephone poles through a series of complex movements, and Jake had reached a breaking point where he was considering ringing the bell that would end his SEAL aspirations. "Jake's a good man," Marcus replied. "He just needed to remember why he was here." Mitchell nodded, then leaned closer so that only Marcus could hear her next words. "There's going to be a moment during this week when you'll be tested in a way that goes beyond physical endurance. When that moment comes, remember what your grandfather taught you about reading patterns and making difficult decisions." Before Marcus could ask what she meant, Mitchell was gone, moving on to check on other candidates struggling in the surf. The moment she had alluded to came on Wednesday night during the most challenging evolution of Hell Week, the around-the-world paddle. Each boat crew was required to paddle their inflatable boats from Coronado to Imperial Beach and back, a journey of roughly 14 miles in ocean conditions that were deliberately chosen to be as challenging as possible. Marcus's boat crew launched into 8-foot swells with offshore winds that made paddling a battle against both water and weather. The crew had been without meaningful sleep for over 60 hours, and the combination of exhaustion, seasickness, and hypothermia was pushing everyone to their breaking point. 3 hours into the paddle, with the boat crew still miles from their turnaround point, disaster struck. David Kumar, who had been struggling with seasickness since the evolution began, suddenly collapsed over his paddle and became unresponsive. Marcus immediately took charge of the crisis. While continuing to paddle to maintain the boat's position in the heavy seas, he quickly assessed David's condition. His teammate was conscious but severely dehydrated and showing signs of heat exhaustion despite the cold conditions. Standard procedure would have been to fire a flare and request immediate extraction by safety boats. But Marcus knew that calling for medical evacuation would not only end David's SEAL aspirations, it would likely result in the entire boat crew being removed from Hell Week. Instead, Marcus made a decision that demonstrated both his tactical thinking and his understanding of SEAL values. He repositioned David in the center of the boat, where he would be most protected from the waves, then reorganized the remaining crew members to compensate for the loss of one paddler. Morrison, you take bow position and set the rhythm, Marcus ordered. Hernandez, you're on navigation. I'll stay with Kumar and paddle from his position. We're going to complete this evolution as a crew. Jake Morrison, who had been close to his own breaking point, found new reserves of strength in response to Marcus's clear leadership. The boat crew developed a rhythm that allowed them to make steady progress despite their reduced capabilities. More importantly, Marcus began a careful process of treating David's condition using techniques his grandfather had taught him for dealing with exhaustion and dehydration. Small sips of water, careful monitoring of breathing, and constant encouragement to maintain consciousness. David, stay with me, Marcus said quietly, his voice barely audible over the wind and waves. Remember what we learned about breathing control. Slow and steady. Your body knows what to do. Just give it the chance. For the next 4 hours, Marcus essentially paddled for 2 people while simultaneously providing medical care for his teammate and maintaining leadership of the boat crew. By the time they reached the turnaround point at Imperial Beach, David had recovered enough to resume limited paddling. The return journey was completed in darkness, with Marcus navigating by compass and stars while keeping constant watch on his crew's condition. When they finally reached the beach at Coronado after 8 hours on the water, all 6 active members of the boat crew were still functional. Petty Officer Williams was waiting on the beach with a medical team, having monitored their progress through radio communications with safety boats. His first concern was David Kumar's condition, but his attention quickly shifted to Marcus. Chun, explain what happened out there, Williams demanded. Marcus gave a concise report of the medical emergency and his decision-making process, emphasizing the crew's collective effort to complete the evolution. He was careful not to downplay David's condition, but he made it clear that the emergency had been managed without compromising safety or mission completion. Williams listened without interruption, then turned to examine David Kumar personally. After a few minutes of assessment, he declared David fit to continue with Hell Week, a decision that brought visible relief to the entire boat crew. But Williams wasn't finished with Marcus. Chun, step aside. Marcus followed the instructor away from the group, wondering if his unconventional handling of the emergency was about to result in disciplinary action. What you did out there, keeping your crew together, treating Kumar's condition, completing the evolution, that was outstanding leadership under extreme conditions, Williams said. But I need to know something. Where did you learn those medical techniques? That wasn't standard first aid you were using. Marcus hesitated, then decided to trust Williams with a partial truth. My grandfather taught me some traditional techniques for dealing with exhaustion and dehydration. He learned them during his military service. Williams studied Marcus's face for a long moment. Your grandfather served where? Korea, Petty Officer Williams. Williams nodded slowly, and Marcus could see him processing this information in the context of what he had observed during the evolution. Chun, you're developing a reputation among the instructor staff, not just for your performance, but for the way you handle crisis situations. That kind of tactical thinking and cultural knowledge, that's valuable in ways you might not understand yet. Before Marcus could respond, Williams was called away to deal with another boat crew that had experienced difficulties during the paddle. But as Marcus rejoined his teammates, he noticed Lieutenant Commander Mitchell watching from a distance, making notes in her waterproof notebook. The remainder of Hell Week passed in a blur of exhaustion and determination. Thursday brought the famous Steel Pier evolution, where boat crews were required to paddle under the Coronado Bridge and around Steel Pier in conditions that tested their ability to work as a team under extreme stress. Friday's final evolution was a 14-mile run from Coronado to the Mexican border and back, with full gear and boat crews carrying their boats for significant portions of the journey. Marcus's crew completed the run, with all members still functional. One of only 5 boat crews to finish Hell Week without losing any members to injury or voluntary withdrawal. When Hell Week officially ended at sunset on Friday, Class 285 had been reduced to 22 candidates. Marcus stood with his surviving classmates on the beach at Coronado, exhausted but victorious, knowing that they had passed the most significant test of their lives. Master Chief Torres addressed the survivors with words that would stay with them forever. Gentlemen, you have just proven to yourselves and to the SEAL community that you have the basic qualities needed to serve in naval special warfare. But remember, Hell Week was not about physical strength. It was about character. You succeeded because you refused to quit when quitting would have been easier than continuing. As the ceremony concluded and the candidates were finally allowed to rest, Marcus felt a hand on his shoulder. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell had approached him as the group was dispersing. Chun, congratulations. Your performance this week was exceptional, particularly your leadership during the around-the-world paddle, she said. I think it's time for you to meet someone who has been very interested in your progress. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. Mom, be at the administrative building tomorrow at 0800. There's a commander who would like to speak with you about your family history and your future in the teams. As Marcus walked back to the barracks that night, his mind was racing despite his physical exhaustion. Hell Week was over, and he had proven himself capable of meeting the SEAL standard. But clearly, his journey was just beginning. The tattoo on his arm, hidden throughout the brutal 5 days of Hell Week, suddenly felt significant in a new way. His grandfather's legacy, Commander Morrison's promise, and his own developing reputation were converging towards something larger than just earning his SEAL Trident. Tomorrow would bring answers to questions he was only beginning to understand. But tonight, he would rest with the satisfaction of knowing that he had honored his grandfather's example of courage under impossible conditions. The hidden mark beneath his sleeve had remained secret, but its significance was about to be revealed in ways that would change everything he thought he knew about his future as a SEAL. Marcus arrived at the administrative building at 0755 hours, 15 minutes early as military protocol demanded. Despite having finally gotten 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep for the first time in a week, he felt nervous energy coursing through his system. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell's cryptic words about meeting a commander who was interested in his family history had kept him awake for much of the night. The administrative building was quieter than usual on Saturday morning, with most of the staff enjoying weekend liberty. Marcus reported to the reception desk, where he was directed to a conference room on the second floor. When he opened the door, Marcus found himself face-to-face with a man who commanded immediate respect. The commander was in his early 50s, with graying hair and the kind of weathered features that spoke of decades in special operations. His uniform displayed ribbons and qualifications that told a story of service in conflicts around the world. Seaman Chun, please have a seat, the commander said, gesturing to a chair across from his position at the conference table. I'm Commander James Harrison, and I apologize for the formal setting, but what we're going to discuss requires a certain level of privacy. Marcus sat down, maintaining proper military bearing despite his curiosity about what was to come. First, congratulations on completing Hell Week, Harrison continued. Your performance throughout BUD/S has been exceptional, but your leadership during the crisis situations has been particularly noteworthy. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell has provided detailed reports on your tactical thinking and decision-making under pressure. Thank you, sir, Marcus replied, still uncertain where this conversation was heading. Harrison opened a folder that had been lying on the table between them. Chun, I'm going to share some information with you that is classified at levels you don't currently have clearance for. But given your family history and your demonstrated capabilities, there are people in the intelligence community who believe you should be brought into a particular program. Marcus felt his pulse quicken, remembering his grandfather's warnings about the larger significance of their family story. Your grandfather, Wei Chun, served with distinction during the Korean War, Harrison continued. But what you may not know is that his service continued long after the armistice was signed. He worked with American intelligence agencies for several years, providing cultural and linguistic expertise for operations throughout East Asia. This was news to Marcus. His grandfather had never mentioned continued service after the war. Commander Morrison, the SEAL officer your grandfather helped save in Korea, maintained contact with Wei Chun throughout his career. When Morrison learned that Wei's grandson was applying for SEAL training, he made sure that certain people would be watching your progress. Harrison turned a page in the folder, revealing what appeared to be intelligence photographs and documents. The coordinates that your grandfather memorized in Korea, they marked the location of intelligence materials that were never recovered. Documents, communications intercepts, and strategic assessments that could still have significant value today. The political situation on the Korean peninsula is changing, and there may be opportunities in the near future to recover those materials. Marcus's mind raced as he processed the implications. Sir, are you saying that there's a mission? I'm saying that there's a possibility, Harrison interrupted. The kind of operation that would require someone with exceptional tactical skills, cultural understanding, and the ability to navigate complex political situations. Someone who could blend in culturally, but operate with SEAL-level capabilities. Harrison leaned forward, his expression becoming more intense. But before we can even consider such possibilities, I need to know something. Your grandfather mentioned that he had passed along certain information to you. Information that might be relevant to locating the materials in question. Marcus knew the moment had arrived. The tattoo hidden beneath his sleeve was about to fulfill its purpose in ways his grandfather had only hinted at. Yes, sir, Marcus said quietly. He shared the story with me, and I chose to honor it in a particular way. Without further hesitation, Marcus rolled up his sleeve, revealing the intricate tattoo that replicated his grandfather's hidden coordinates and symbols. Harrison's eyes widened slightly as he studied the detailed markings. May I? Harrison asked, producing a magnifying glass from his briefcase. Marcus extended his arm, allowing Harrison to examine the tattoo closely. The commander spent several minutes studying each element of the design, comparing it to documents in his folder. This is remarkable, Harrison said finally. The detail is perfect down to the smallest characters. And there are elements here, he pointed to the subtle additions that Li Song had made that provide authentication codes we thought were lost forever. Marcus remembered Li Song's cryptic comment about insurance and realized that the old tattoo artist had known far more about the significance of the design than he had revealed. Chun, what I'm about to tell you is compartmentalized at the highest levels, Harrison continued, his voice dropping to near whisper level. There's been a joint intelligence operation in development for over 3 years, waiting for the right combination of political opportunity and operational capability. Recent changes in the North Korean leadership structure have created a potential window for a limited reconnaissance mission to the coordinates your grandfather memorized. Marcus felt the weight of decades of history settling on his shoulders. What kind of mission, sir? The kind that would require a small team of highly trained operators who could penetrate denied territory, locate and recover specific materials, and extract without triggering an international incident. The kind of mission where cultural knowledge and linguistic ability would be as important as tactical skills. Harrison closed the folder and leaned back in his chair. I'm not offering you anything today, Chun. You still have months of training ahead of you before you would be qualified for such an operation. But I am asking if you would be interested in pursuing the additional training and clearances that would make you eligible for consideration. Marcus thought about his grandfather's words on that rainy evening when this journey had begun. When those moments come, I want you to remember that courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to do what is right even when you are terrified. Sir, if my skills and my heritage can serve a useful purpose, then I'm honored to be considered, Marcus replied. Harrison nodded approvingly. I expected that answer. Commander Morrison spoke highly of your grandfather's character, and it appears that quality runs in the family. The commander stood up, signaling that the formal part of their meeting was concluding. But as Marcus prepared to leave, Harrison added one final comment. Chin, there's something else you should know. Your grandfather's actions in Korea saved more than just American lives. The intelligence he provided helped prevent an escalation that could have led to the use of nuclear weapons. The sacrifice he made and the risk he took may have saved hundreds of thousands of lives. Marcus felt tears threatening to form in his eyes as he absorbed the magnitude of his grandfather's heroism. He never told me that part of the story, sir. Men like your grandfather rarely speak about the full scope of what they've accomplished. They carry their burdens quietly and let their actions speak for themselves. It's a quality that runs deep in the best warriors. As Marcus left the administrative building and walked back toward the barracks, his mind was overwhelmed by the convergence of past and future. His grandfather's courage during the Korean War was creating opportunities that he could never have imagined. The tattoo on his arm, which had begun as a memorial to family history, was now a key to operations that could impact international relations. But more than that, Marcus realized that his journey through BUD/S training had been preparing him not just to be a SEAL, but to carry forward a legacy of service that transcended individual achievement. The leadership skills he had demonstrated during Hell Week, the tactical thinking he had shown during crisis situations, and the cultural knowledge he carried from his heritage were all components of a unique capability that someone at the highest levels of government considered strategically valuable. That afternoon, Marcus called his grandfather from the payphone near the barracks. When Wei Chin answered, Marcus could hear the anticipation in the old man's voice. The meeting went well. Wei asked without preamble, Grandfather, they told me things about your service that you never shared. Things about preventing nuclear war, about intelligence operations that continued for years after Korea. Wei was quiet for a long moment. There are burdens, grandson, that a man carries alone until he finds someone worthy to share them with. You have proven yourself worthy, not just through your training, but through your character. They may ask me to recover the materials you hid in Korea, Marcus said quietly. And if they do, Marcus looked down at the tattoo on his arm, thinking about the coordinates that have been passed down through generations, about his grandfather's courage in impossible circumstances, and about the opportunity to serve something larger than himself. Then, I'll honor the story by finishing what you started. Wei Chin's voice carried pride and sadness in equal measure when he replied. Then, you understand what it means to be part of something that matters more than your own life. That understanding, grandson, is the most important thing I could ever teach you. As Marcus hung up the phone and walked back to his barracks, he felt the full weight of his inheritance settling around him like armor. The hidden tattoo beneath his sleeve was no longer just a memorial to past heroism. It was a commitment to future service that would test everything he had learned about courage, sacrifice, and duty. The remaining months of BUD/S training stretched ahead of him, followed by advanced training that would prepare him for the most challenging missions the SEAL teams could offer. But now Marcus understood that his training was building towards something specific, something that connected his grandfather's sacrifice in Korea to potential operations that could shape the future of international relations. He thought about Master Chief Torres' words at the end of Hell Week. You succeeded because you refused to quit when quitting would have been easier than continuing. Marcus realized that his grandfather had faced that same choice decades ago in a prisoner of war camp in Korea. And now, with the coordinates tattooed on his arm and the legacy of courage burning in his heart, Marcus was preparing to face his own moment of choice. The tattoo that had been hidden throughout his training was about to be revealed to people who understood its true significance. And when that moment came, Marcus would be ready to honor his grandfather's courage by demonstrating his own. The hidden mark had remained secret through Hell Week and beyond, but its time was coming. Soon, very soon, a SEAL commander would see the coordinates tattooed on Marcus's arm and understand that some stories of courage echo across generations, connecting past heroism to future possibilities. And when that commander saluted the young SEAL who carried his grandfather's legacy beneath his sleeve, it would mark not an ending, but a beginning, the start of a new chapter in a story of service that had begun in a Korean prisoner of war camp and would continue wherever courage and sacrifice were needed to protect the innocent and serve the greater good.